Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. My name is Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I welcome you to join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation on the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page or access additional VIP content as a premium subscriber via Patreon. For just a couple of dollars a month, you can get an early access to episodes, additional bonus content, and your chance to connect with my guests. To do so, simply visit patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. Let's talk near death.
So they told my wife, listen, we have multiple days of 6+ hour operations coming up. We could lose him at any time. He's a little bit of a handful, so we're going to put him in a coma for that week or whatever time. And she said, okay, go ahead. So literally when they put me into the coma, that's when my near-death experience began. It was as if I was just teleported into this other place. And then over on the side was this large egg-like structure, like a lattice work that was all bent around to form an egg shape.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Today I'm talking with Jim Bruton, an Emmy award-winning journalist who experienced a near-death experience when a historical plane that he was flying crashed in October of 2016. It was due to the extent of his injuries that doctors put Jim into a week-long coma to work out their next course of action. During this time is when Jim believes that he had his near-death experience. Jim, welcome to the show. It's great to connect with you.
Hey, Kirsty, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Can we go back a little bit in time? Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening in your life, what you remember before your near-death experience, and then how this all played out?
Of course. Well, I used to travel a lot, and then I settled down, and my new wife said, well, now that you're not traveling so much, why don't you build this airplane you're always talking about? And since I was a child, I loved historical aviation. I mean, really early time airplanes. So I did. I built a World War I fighter plane. It took me about 8 years of faithful reproduction. Wow. Flew fine, and then I sold it to an Air Force pilot, and then I built my second plane, and that's where the story starts to really come to focus. It was called a Flying Flea from 1933. It kind of looks like a very small, in the States here we call it soapbox derby car. The Boy Scouts build them, and they're just gravity fed, race downhill, yeah. But they're very, very lightweight. And so imagine an airplane that looks a little like that. But with a big BMW motorcycle engine right in front of your face, a wing above your head and white behind your neck. So it looked like something out of a Disney cartoon, to be honest. But it was so whimsical and so cute. I said, well, that's going to be my next airplane. So I took it out on October 3rd, 2016 for its first test flight. And it was okay, but I didn't really like the way it handled. So I went out on October 6th, determined to master it and figure it out, its quirks. And it was during that second test flight that I lost my engine. It just quit. And I couldn't make it back to my grass strip airfield. So the only place left to aim for was a pond in a nearby camp. And I just aimed for this little lake and overshot the bank and hit all of these tree trunks again in this tiny little airplane that's 70 miles an hour, a little over 100 kilometers an hour, and it just splintered into matchsticks everywhere. I don't know how I didn't eat the engine, really, but when the plane stopped crashing, there was literally no plane left around me except to the part I was seatbelted to behind me. I broke all my ribs. I ruptured both lungs. My right leg was broken in so many places, and the battery had broken loose and hit me in the back and literally made a hole in my back. I mean, it was just really bad. Other than that, I was fine. So anyway, luckily there was a man nearby fishing, and he normally didn't have a cell phone on him, and normally he wouldn't have been there because the camp was closed. But luckily, on this day, he did have his phone, and he rushed over called our emergency number, and they told him what to do to keep me alive until a helicopter could come and extract me. So he did all that, and which was great. But I asked him when I met him. We stay in touch. Actually, I asked, was I making any sense, or was I saying anything? He goes, no. In fact, you weren't even able to breathe. You could only gasp for air because you had no lungs really working. So anyway, the helicopter lands. They cut me out, and they take me up to Hartford Hospital here in Hartford, Connecticut. And the trauma team there, first of all, I cannot say enough good about them. They are amazing. Even people who do nothing other than push beds around, they're into their work, and they're just incredible. I'd say anybody around here who's interested in a medical career should definitely look at that. But anyway, so my wife finally hears about it. It's actually kind of funny. The how we all carry our cell phones now, and sometimes we have news alerts. And a friend of mine picked up my phone at the hangar, the airport hangar, to bring it to me in Hartford. And when he picked it up, it woke up and he saw these alerts on it. So he took a screenshot of it for me. I said, this is like my same warped sense of humor. But in there were two alerts. One said, there's been an airplane crash in that general vicinity. And the second alert was, you missed a call from your wife. So she knew. Yeah. So anyway, she called the right people and found out what had happened and where I was, and came to the hospital and found me in a breathing machine with tubes coming out and going into every part of my body to keep me alive. And anyway, I got out of the restraints they had me in. So they told my wife, listen, we have multiple days of 6+ hour operations coming up. We could lose him at any time. He's a little bit of a handful, so we're going to put him in a coma for that week or whatever time. And she said, okay, go ahead. So literally when they put me into the coma, that's when my near-death experience began, best I can tell. And so for me, the out-of-body experience lasted for a week in time as we measure it here. But there I was told it was in a split second. So I can get into that in just a second. So in terms of the near-death experience, when we talk about near-death experiences, there are a lot of similarities, such as going through a tunnel or seeing deceased loved ones, seeing a life review, things like this. For me, it was a bit different than that. It was as if I was just teleported into this other place. And this other place, it's actually a picture on the wall up behind me of a sort of a post-apocalyptic scene of like a ruined city, like any major city 100,000 years after it was abandoned. And these heavy storm clouds were above me, but there was no rain. It was just they were ready to break loose. And then over on the side was this large egg-like structure, like a lattice work that was all bent around to form an egg shape. And the one thing that was unusual was I felt nauseous. I felt sick to my stomach there, but I wasn't afraid, and I saw no other being. I heard nothing, but I felt so nauseous. And I was hit by a wave of nausea. I said, I don't think I can stand this. And all of a sudden, I was aware that there were a lot of little tiny gears within this egg, and they started moving around when I said that. And I said, well, this thing and I must somehow be connected. So I walked over there and looked through the lattice work inside the egg and saw these gears. And they were a particular kind of gear called a sector gear. When we think of gears, we normally think of gears that are all the way around, with their little teeth. A sector gear is a partial arc of that gear. And usually you find them in clock-like mechanisms because they're designed to sweep back and forth. The subtlety there is it is a gear by whose motion you can say there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Interesting, and that comes up as well. So I remember I was looking at that and I was like, what is this all about? And what is this? And I literally said, what is this thing? And that is when, I guess you could say, a conversation started to happen between the in-between and me. I did not see the source of this voice. It was just, when people say it was like a telepathic conversation, as we perceive the world around us, it's as if we have a projector in our head that projects everything we're seeing or tasting, feeling, doing on a screen. It's as if the words just bypassed everything and they were on the screen, kind of like that. And it said, I said, what is this thing? What's happening? And it said, this is the future birthing into the now, that this is the process of becoming. And I remember, as I looked at the gears, some were definite and some were more ghost-like, but each time I looked at them, I could see what they represented, like as a little video feed that played inside my head. And I understood these to be events in my future, and that they're actually probabilities. They weren't certainties, but they were probabilities. And I got to thinking, well, maybe the ones that look more definite are the ones with a greater degree of certainty that they will occur, and the ones that were more ghost-like perhaps are a little further removed from possibility, but it's still possible. Anyway, as I looked closer, it said, this is the process of becoming. And as I was reaching around within there to see, can I feel these gears, or do they just pass through my hand, because they could pass through each other? All of a sudden I touched one and I got an incredible wave of nausea. And reflexively, I just grabbed it and pulled it out and through the lattice work and threw it away. And then it started spinning around again. And I said, what's happening now? And it said, each gear is a probability of a thought, word, or action in your future, and your destiny is resetting itself around what you've removed. And I remember I said, well, how did I even know I could do that? And it said, why else are you here? And I said, I don't even know what this place is. And it said, you're in the in-between. And I, of course, said, well, in between what? And it said, everything, the impossible now between the past and the future. And I said, makes no sense whatsoever. And it said, it's impossible in its short duration, yet here you are standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And then it said, do you remember the body do you remember who you are in the world to which your body belongs? And I literally thought and said, I have no idea. I had no memory of my life here. If somebody had come up and said, if you stay here any longer, you can't go back, I would have said, go back where? To your family. What family? I was absolutely so much in that moment that there was no past, no history to remember. There was no future to anticipate. And honestly, it's as if I was just depersonalized in every possible way, just aware of being a conscious being. But like I said, there was no fear. There was no emotion of any sort. It was more just acquiescence, ready to accept whatever was unfolding before me. And I said, when it said that you're in between everything, that the impossible now between the past and the future, I said, what does that mean? It said, it's impossible in its short duration, yet here you are standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And later on, when I came back, like a lot of other near-death experiencers, we take a look at things like quantum mechanics, and there are various degrees of understanding for us all in terms of quantum physics. And for me, I'd say it's very consumer grade, but physics was one of my majors, and I like math and all that. So sometimes I feel like I can go a little deeper. And Max Planck was considered, to be one of the fathers of quantum physics. And there's a moment of time called a Planck time, and it's like 10 to the minus 44 seconds, like 1/100 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. So the sense I was getting afterwards in working all this out was that's how long I was there for. But we all have heard how time moves differently on I'll just say it, the higher planes than it does here, that it sometimes seems to go slower, perhaps, like a day there could be 100 years here, perhaps. And one thing I've thought about, and this also comes from physics, that for light, there is no time. And E equals mc squared, Einstein's big equation, says that things that have mass, as they approach the speed of light, their mass approaches infinity. Distance contracts to zero, and so does time. So think about it. I mean, if you leave this body, you're becoming more light. And for light, with which there is no time, it makes sense that time would flow at a different rate, if at all. So, it's one of these things you're sort of putting it together as you come back to make sense of it all. But the amazing thing is that no matter which way I would look at the experience, from a scientific angle or pulling out all my comparative religion or mystical books, it just makes sense. It's logically and internally consistent in every way. And that right there was kind of amazing. I've never been able to find any kind of flaw in the experience that made me have any doubt whatsoever as to what happened. So anyway, as I kept working to pull out these gears, and the message really here was that I was being given an opportunity to remove from my future various possibilities that would be to my spiritual detriment. So each time I felt around inside the gear, and inside the egg, and I had to feel, it's not like I could always see where the gears were. I was reaching up high. I guess maybe it was symbolic of reaching into the future. And I'm sure that not being able to see them clearly probably remove some temptation too. I mean, imagine if one gear said you were going to win the lottery and be rich for life, but you'd be a really big jerk. Well, most of us in seeing that would say, we promise not to be a jerk. Well, if the creator of the universe knows better, they may, not want you to be so sorely tempted. But pain is something as a guide. If you can equate that pain to your spiritual detriment, that is a very sure guide. And so even though you're a bit blind, you're not unable to discern. So I just kept feeling around for one gear after another that felt bad and made me more sick, and I removed it, the machine, if you will, recalibrated, and I just kept going with that. And all the while, it's like we're still having this conversation. And when I said, I don't remember where I came from or who I am, and said, then you see the truth in how the past is dust. And I said, why do some of these gears, some of these futures that I touch make me sick and not others? And it said that all choices have unintended consequences, some unfortunate and some not. The pain each brings you is your guide. And I don't know if it was as a joke or just an honest question, I said, where are the gears that feel good? And it said, you're not here to feel good. And that wasn't meant to sound menacing. It was just, you're here to do some work. And later on, I came up with this analogy. If 10 people went to Disney World to have a really, 5 of them might want to go on every ride possible, and 5 guides will show up and they'll escort them to every ride they want and answer all their questions. Whereas the other 5 may want to go behind the ride to see the gears and the valves and the levers and all these things from a mechanical point of view, if you will. And so while the tourists, if you will, are seeing the same ride from, the animatronics that move and dance and sing, the mechanics, if you will, are behind the scenes working to make things better, to improve it, to say, well, this gear is going to be bad, we need to replace it, and things like that. Now, both populations are experiencing the same ride, but from 2 totally different perspectives. So this is, a near-death experience is a very much behind-the-scenes tour of the grand reality. It's because everybody comes back and they go, wow, we really see life here in a much more accurate way. We see it for what it is. Our story doesn't begin here and it doesn't end here. And and so on and so forth, that many, many holy books have written and many holy discourses have explained. So that's not to say, I didn't see the occasional gear whip by with some beautiful memory. Like I could see my grandkids one day. We would be at an amusement park, and obviously I let that gear go by. But one time, after removing a bunch of gears, I did look behind me and I saw this big pile of gears. And I said, it's starting to look like if I don't have a bad future, I have no future at all. Look at all these gears. And I said, I am feeling less pain now as I'm cleaning up my future. but am I going to die sooner as a result of all this? And it said, your destiny has to fit itself around futures that aren't meant to be. Your number of breaths are counted. I will worry about your last one. And I said, I don't know how comforting that is. He said, eliminating bad choices doesn't mean that you won't make wrong ones. You won't know they're wrong until after they pass. And since right and wrong are variables over which you have no control, the answers to what comes tomorrow are a waste. Better is understanding the beauty of how everything fits and refits together. And that was, me watching this process of how no matter what you do, you can't really, it's like you move your hand through water. You can't create a hole. It fills right in. Mm-hmm. And this is also the nature of this universe, and I guess the other universes beyond here. And then it really said some very profound things. I said, so what am I missing here in my lack of understanding? And it said, what is clearly before you? Grace. It said, no one deserves salvation. It can only be given by grace. It is your birthright, but it must be chosen at the expense of the world that separates us. And at one point I said, this fixing my future is painful. I feel kind of ashamed that I'm not using a moral compass or some mantra or scripture to guide me. It's just pain. And I said, I don't even know when these futures are going to happen. And I said, where is no more important than what or when? Removing your enthusiasm to further chain yourself to the world isn't as painful as carrying the crushing weight of those chains once forged around you. And then I looked around. I said, it's between the dead city and the brooding storm clouds and just basically the lack of anything that could distract me. No angelic music, no beautiful beings, no rainbows and unicorns. I mean, just like this place was designed to just help me not be distracted. And I said, it's as if it was designed for one thing and one thing only, with no chance for me to mess it up. And that's when it said, the in-between said to me probably the most profound thing I've ever heard. It said, if those with choices make poor use of them, then offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. Mm-hmm. And with that, I watched a gear disintegrate into dust as it passed from the present into the past. And as I looked at that and thought about it, the in-between said, you can't change the past, but you can make better choices in the future. Everything is interconnected, and pay more attention to your relationships. Be gentle with everyone as I'm gentle with you. And I remember saying, gentle, what's gentle about all this? Mm-hmm. And it said, you prayed for something for which being here is the answer. And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, I looked around one last time and put my hand on the egg and said, I think I can live with this now. And that's when I came back here. It still gives me chills to recount it. But I mean, I am so grateful for the opportunity to have that. And as a footnote to this, it's amazing when people have near-death experiences, let's say due to a crazy accident like a plane crash, car crash, drowning, whatever, or serious illness, or some visit in the hospital in which they die and then they come back. It's amazing how those events themselves are almost footnotes in the story, whereas without the near-death experience, they could be the story. Like, wow, you're not going to believe what happened to me, and everybody was sitting on the edge of their seat to hear about it. But when you have a near-death experience, like I said, all of these horrible occurrences become footnotes. You almost forget to even include them in the story. And for many of us, there may not even be any PTSD about it. I mean, I have no problem of getting into an airplane and flying again. And
wow.
One interesting footnote to that was, okay, so I come to in the hospital and I'm like, okay, my head's, remember, okay, so let me back up a second. My memory was affected for sure, and I find that also of interest. I had to go back in my emails from the time of my crash back to find an email I remembered, and that was 2 full days before my crash. And then when I came out of my coma, let's say that week later, I would say it was another week before I had any memories also, because I mean, figure I'm still in physical shock. I'm still probably loaded full of anesthesia and painkillers and just heaven knows what. So I find it interesting that in this, say, 1 week, with bookends on either side of absolute amnesia, probably couldn't even think straight. But in that, in between those two aspects, was a time in which I was super conscious. I mean, I was very clear. I had full memory. I don't know. I just kind of find that interesting as well. And anyway, I was talking to this one friend who asked me, on the day you flew, did you have a bad premonition that maybe you shouldn't go flying? And I said, well, other than the fact that it's a historical reproduction and I didn't like how it flew, no, not really. But it's interesting as you ask that question, I can tell that because of my near-death experience, I want to answer that a little differently. And to me, I would ask the question in this way: forget premonition. If I'd had full knowledge of what was getting ready to happen, that this plane was going to crash and the near-death experience that would follow, would I have had the guts to get in the cockpit anyway? Now, obviously, most of us could not answer yes to that, and I don't think I could either. But since I know that I should be able to say yes, I think maybe for now that's enough. And let's face it, I mean, if God wants to bring you over to the other side for one-on-one time for a week, what price is too great to pay? And I mean, you're probably not going to outrun him anyway. But like I said, in terms of how a near-death experience can remove your fear of death, that seems to be pretty universal. We may not be fans of how you get there, but overall, it just puts everything into a different perspective. Anyway, that brings you back to when I was in the hospital and coming to and starting to put it all together in my head. It was just sort of almost playing over and over in my head like this video feed. And like the first person I shared my story with was actually my morning nurse. She was fantastic. And as I shared with her my story, she started to cry. And I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because I don't want you to die." And I said, "Well, you're a nurse in a hospital. You see death all the time." And she said, "But you're magical." And I said, "Okay, what do you mean by that?" And to better answer that, I could say this. You know how what's reported is many times when a person has a spiritually transformative experience, of which NDE is a subset, as they say, if you weren't psychic before, you may be psychic after. If you were psychic before, you may be more psychic after. For me, it's not like I'm saying, okay, I have a premonitions or I can do healing or anything like that. I would say my gift was empathy. And this is also commonly reported. Increased empathy for near-death experiencers. And this was mine. And this really came out when my nurse said that I was magical. And I asked her what she meant. And she said, well, everybody in the hospital gets one doctor in about 15 minutes of their time a day. Very busy. For some reason, you have 5 doctors. They come in here into your room. They're all standing around for an hour and a half. And she said, and I snoop. I walk by the door. What are they talking about? And she said, you're talking about everything but your medical case. You're talking about life, the universe, everything. And one of them wants you to be in business with them so bad he has you on international conference calls at night, your leg in a cage up in the air. You're doped up on all kinds of things. And she said, I've never seen anything like it. And, I'm just kind of recording this in my head. Thinking about it, there's not a lot to say other than just, yeah, you're right. This is wild. But I've really had some amazing empathic moments. And I would also say this, and I'm having them all the time, even up to yesterday, mind-blowing things happen. And if I can just sort of So I feel like I'm almost jumping to the end of my story, but it fits so well and it's so important. I was having some screens in my windows of my home replaced, and I took them to a nearby shop, and then they called me and said they're ready. So I go to pick them up, and as is true with a lot of near-death experiencers, if you give us 5 minutes and we get bored, we're going to find a way to start talking to you about our near-death experience. It's a little strange, I'm sure, but I really don't care. I just do it. And you never know what kind of reactions you're going to get. Obviously, if someone looked uncomfortable or they thought, okay, you're fringe, I would change the subject. But the people who own the shop were very interested. And I said, are you sure? Oh, no, we're really interested. So I give them the whole story. And as I did, their daughter walked in the store, and she looked at me and she said, I remember you. Now, my plane crash was 3 years and 4 months ago, and she was an upper thoracic heart registered nurse who attended me when I was there. Now, her parents had just asked, kind of like we were saying, after the experience, did you find you're more intuitive or have any other abilities? And I said, not so much. I said, it's all about relationships and people and timing. And then the daughter walked in and they saw exactly what I was saying exemplified in front of them. And you could see they were just sort of trying to put this all together because the odds of this happening were so remote. I mean, you have a better chance of either getting hit by lightning or winning the lottery. But it was just amazing when she said, I remember you. And I just couldn't believe it. So anyway, these things happen a lot. And you also hear how synchronicities in general are more frequent for people after a near-death experience. And I've really thought, it's almost like a near-death experience is a reboot. And now you're coming back as version 2.0. And I've wondered, is it possible that having a near-death experience basically reharmonizes you to the natural order of things? And it's not that you're having to do something extra, you're having to do something more. Maybe there are things you're simply not doing now that are better. And I've really thought a lot about this in terms of removing things from your future because their presence represents a temptation to pull you off your path. And also, I mean, it's almost the thought that we're born, with few exceptions, we're born with everything in us to be happy spiritual beings. But as we grow, as we sacrifice so much to fit in, to feel like we're part of society or part of the popular kids club or whatever, get a job, we have to make so many sacrifices that in the end we do get off track. So what if our meditative practice and our day-to-day living is more about letting go of things that are impediments than worrying that we need to get one more thing or we need to take one more class? Maybe what we should just do, and this is something the in-between absolutely said to me after I came back. Let me back up and tell you why it said this, and you'll see what I'm saying. I have a stressful job in technology, and because of that, before my crash, I would come home and sometimes have, an alcoholic beverage. And if it felt good, I might have another one. So I didn't start drinking until I was 37. So, it's not like, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. But anyway, my wife wasn't too happy to see it. And I said, I'm just stressed out. Well, while I was laying in bed after my near-death experience, while I was still in the hospital, it's as if the representation of alcohol was taken out of me and sort of hovered in space in front of me. And the voice of the in-between, or God, whatever you call it, is fine by me, said, what do you want to do about this? Do you want to take it with you, meaning into your future as part of your life? Or do you want to leave it behind? If you take it with you, I will carry it for you. Which means you have to be very mindful, of what you're doing and who's in the room. He said, but if you want to leave it behind, I will remove all attachment to it. It will have no power over you. It will be as if you never had it. And I said, well, let's leave it behind. He said, okay. And it just sort of disappeared from view. And I haven't had another drink since. Don't want to. I could go into a bar with my wife. She orders a martini, no problem. I could go into a store and buy her a bottle of wine, no problem. It's just drinking is something other people do, not me.
Mm.
And with that, it said, and maybe this is applicable. I don't want anybody who struggles with any like alcohol or any other thing to think that this is a super simple lack of appreciation for their struggles. But I will say what I was told. It said, all the force of will you will ever need is found in the art of letting go. Always live life in celebration of the individual spirit. For no one and no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul. Yeah. And all I can say is, I have had examples in my life that are proof of that. And all you can do is just keep putting one foot in front of the other and just see where it takes you. I mean, certainly there were the typical challenges, when we do research on near-death experiences. I mean, it took me a while to even realize I'd had a near-death experience. I kind of thought I'd gone to purgatory. If you look at the picture behind me, I thought, okay, what's that all about? But over time, I realized, okay, this is a near-death experience. And then as you do research and you see some of the after effects, both physical, psychological, and then of course the electrical and electronic craziness that goes on. You start to see a pattern in your own life. And then from there you move into the integration phase. I call it coping, or what's next, which I'm very much in now and will be for a while. Like I said, only just over 3 years means I'm like a near-death experience baby. But luckily, through the various groups out here, you can meet people who've, 20, 30, 40 years into it, and they can provide a lot of guidance, and that's been great as well.
I want to backtrack a little bit. Your explanation and your description of your NDE is very full. It's very incredible. Even as you're talking, there's quite a few times where I've had questions and I've written them down, and then you've gone on to answer them. So very full explanation, which I appreciate.
Sure.
Can you please tell us what it was like when you came back into your body? Do you remember coming back into your body?
I do not. I would have come back at that. Okay, so let's say I was away for a week in Earth time, if you will. It was another week before I really had any consciousness here, it would seem. And I say that because I was already moved to a different hospital, one for the rehabilitation work. So I was never aware at all of being in the trauma center. But as I came out of that fog, if you will, or my first memories truly were my near-death experience playing as almost like an endless video loop in my head. And there was such power and such gravity to it. It's like you could not think about it. It was there, and it was going to make itself known. It was just going to go over and over it, and until you really knew this was part of you now. And with each time it would go through my head, it was like, of course, there's more detail, and I don't know if that's because you're noticing more, or you're just becoming more used to it, or it's becoming more part of you. But it's definitely a big part of it was that what you intellectually knew before was now woven into the fabric of your being. And toward answering your question, what's interesting is there was a picture. Like I said, I used to have a pretty adventurous life. And when I came, the first thing I remember was seeing a picture taped to the wall that my wife put there. And it's of me smoking cigars with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. I smuggled in 12.6 millimeter, like 50 caliber machine gun belts to them so they could fight the Taliban. This was right after 9/11. Like I said, I used to have very creative work. And she taped that to the wall because it's a really, it's a real kind of macho-y picture, I guess you could say, though I wouldn't typify myself as that. And it was like she was saying, this is to me, this is the best version of you. And I want to give you encouragement to heal back to this. It was very sweet and kindly intended. But as I sat there and looked at the picture, I thought, wow, that's not me anymore at all. That is not me. And I mean, it actually facilitated me understanding how I was different, because I just realized that's not who I am. And then, of course, and then people walk in the room, they see the picture, they want to hear the stories and all that. And so with each telling of that story, I'm realizing more and more how I feel like I'm almost talking about someone else's life rather than mine.
Yeah. So did your sense of purpose and who you were as a person change quite significantly from as soon as you woke up?
You know, it's interesting you say that, because this is something I think about a lot. I started thinking about things like the difference between answers and understanding and purpose and meaning. And all I can say is the first thing you notice is what falls away, like being consumed by money or power, social position, all these things, they just fall away. They are definitely not part of who you are. They do not define you any longer. I mean, we all still have to live in the world and do those things to, make ends meet here. But I realized pretty quickly that one of my big attributes was detachment, serious detachment. I could just sit there and stare at a wall for 6 hours. For 6 months later, 9 months later, and finally my wife said, maybe we need to get you into counseling or something. I said, I'm fine. But as far as purpose, I think it's unfolding now. One nice thing is that every time I have a customer and work with them, they want to hire me. So I guess that's the empathy continuing to work forward. And one customer, the last one, said, we've read everything you've written on the internet. And I said, even my near-death experience? And they go, yeah. In fact, they said, it made more sense out of why we would want to hire you. I couldn't believe it. I mean, imagine going into a possible business opportunity, they know like all your secrets. That was pretty wild. But anyway, one thing it seems that I'm being drawn into, and I say kind of reluctantly a little bit, is more and more the world of the near-death experience. That I have a feeling that this is where I'm supposed to be spending more and more of my time. Let me give you an example of how that was reinforced. We have IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and we had a large conference at the end of August in a couple of states away from where I live in Pennsylvania. And it was interesting. I've never been to a conference before where you walk by all of these strangers in the hall, but when they look at you and you look at them, there's something you recognize. I've never, ever experienced that before. So it was just so natural to connect with people, and they're sitting all over the lobby of the hotel and in the restaurant, and gosh, everywhere, just sharing these intimate details about their lives. I mean, I think it's all about, again, that integration of sometimes it's a struggle, how do you keep it all together? I mean, 78% of NDEers get divorced because the one who didn't have the experience is saying, where did my spouse go? And I mean, it's very tough for a while. I mean, you've definitely been put on a solitary path. It doesn't always mean you have to be alone, but you have been, so to speak, removed from the herd.
For sure. That's wonderful. Thank you, Jim. If we go back a little bit more, when you were in the in-between, you said that you couldn't remember your life. You couldn't associate with anything. If someone's to ask you about your family, you couldn't remember who your family were. There was no connection.
Absolutely.
Did you realize you were dead? Did you think that that was a permanent place? What was going through your mind in terms of, I guess, your future?
Right. Well, I've had another experience. It was about a year ago, in fact. And it helped me understand exactly what you've asked about a little better. And when I was there, I was literally just aware of being a conscious being. Let me ask you a question. Whether it's your own experience or other people's experience, have you ever heard that in the moments of great stress, it's as if you sort of separate it into two? There's a part of you that's functionally dealing with everything, like putting out the fire or driving the car and everything's going crazy or something like that. But then there's another part of you that sort of steps outside of yourself and it's silent and it's watching. That's the part I was in the in-between. That's the best way I can explain it. I was just aware of being conscious and aware. But again, if I say there was no emotion, I mean, there was no excitement, no fear, no sense that, oh, I'm in trouble or what's going on here. Nope, no curiosity. It's just, I'm here. I will deal with everything in the moment it appears. And one night, like I said, it was about a year ago, I think every time I'm going to sleep, a lot of times I'm going out and then I come back, because when I wake up at 3 a.m. like the rest of us do, I can tell my mind works a little differently for a little while. And there were these shadows of tree branches dancing on a wardrobe near our window, and I guess a light or a full moon was on it. And as I watched them, they literally unfolded into being a story. But my mind couldn't understand it. And I realized, okay, it's like I've been out of my body or something. And right now we're talking, when you're over on the other side, it's nonlinear information processing. Everything is very symbolic, just like in dreams. In dreams, very rarely do we remember having a conversation. It's more like you're doing something, and if a person may walk into your space and that person represents something, and that symbolism is what communicates to you, stay, run, talk, interact or whatever. Like they say, flying is symbolic of things. Feeling stressed out and in danger is symbolic of other things. So it's as if that is also the language in the in-between. And you can see from the picture, there's a lot of inherent symbolism there. So I guess that's the best way to explain it. Whereas normal thinking is very linear. We do A, then we do B, then we do C and D. I was saying it's kind of like if you were wanting to learn how to put a car in, or if you wanted to understand how a car engine worked, you could get a basket of parts and a step-by-step guide of how to put them together, or you could put on like X-ray glasses and go watch an engine run and see how everything is moving together in all these patterns, and you would have a really good understanding of how an engine works. And it's kind of like that. So I was able to flip at that moment. I was able to flip back and forth between linear and nonlinear perceptions of what I was seeing. And in linear, I could see the story. When I went nonlinear and I was very present, I couldn't remember. Like imagine it was a video feed, and how video has frames. It's like I couldn't remember the frame I just saw, and I couldn't anticipate the frame that was coming. You're just in the moment, looking at the one frame that's right now, and then you forget. I said it'd be like taking an amnesiac to the cinema and watching them try to watch a movie. It might be entertaining, it might be frustrating, but it would be a little different.
Yeah. And is that something which you've brought back with you when you woke up? Did you find that you had any ability to remember things in a different way, or you talked about being in not two places at once, but to step aside from whatever's happening? What have you brought back with you in terms of after effects? Anything like that?
You're gonna love this. First of all, definitely the electronic and electrical, light bulbs blew out the air conditioning in the home, the microwave, all this stuff within a very short period of time. Even have had some strange electronic communication anomalies go on. One was I was going to visit PMH Atwater down in Virginia, about 7 hours from here. And when I was 20 minutes out from her house, my phone that I had on my dashboard that was telling me by my GPS that I was only 20 minutes away, all of a sudden Facebook Messenger wakes up on it, and an NDE friend said, "I don't know why, but I'm thinking of you." I said, "Because I'm 20 minutes from PMH Atwater's house." And while my hands are on the steering wheel, I'm just looking at the phone, and when on Facebook Messenger, when they're typing their message, you just see these little dots going across the screen, and that's telling you wait for their answer. Well, while I'm waiting and I'm driving, all of a sudden my text field started to fill in as if I were typing or dictating a message. And it literally said, "Thank you for being a kind and loving person."
Wow.
I didn't type that. That was in my text field, so she's not typing that.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Well, I took a screen grab, almost went off the road, but I got a screen grab of it. And then a few weeks later, I was put in touch with a Hungarian researcher who lives in Austria. She was beginning to do a research project. And on Monday morning, I got in my car, put my phone in the cradle, thought, well, let me just quickly check emails before I drive. And there was an email from her. However, the body of the email itself was from my first wife 11 years before about a totally different spiritual matter. Now, two emails 11 years apart, both about something spiritual, somehow were merged and were in a folder that did not exist at that time. So 11 years ago. So I went to like the Cisco experts, because like I said, I work in technology, the highest rated. I said, how could this happen? How could these two emails come together like that? And they said, we can't even begin to explain how that could happen.
Wow.
I know. But there were, so that's on the electronic side. I mean, or, the electrical, the really manifest, I mean, cash registers going down in stores and the whole thing. Just after a while, it's like, okay, just another thing. Something though that was even more interesting to me, and I would love to find out if this has happened with anyone else so that I could better understand it. 3 times within a few months, people actually, it's as if I was looking at somebody who shape-shifted into someone else. Okay, so my wife leases private jets to people who can afford to do that sort of thing. And our 2 of our children, they were like 20 and 21 years old. She was inviting them to the office party at the end of year holidays. And she said, of course, you have to dress up and you have to be on your best behavior, which no problem, they are anyway. But when we got there, when our youngest daughter was walking across the parking lot toward the car, I didn't recognize her. Now, it's not like I'm having a stroke. It's not like I'm suffering from whatever you call it when you can't recognize faces. I mean, I knew my wife and knew everybody else. And I just remember saying something, well, that young lady looks very put together. And my wife thought I was just making a joke. And I said, no, I didn't recognize it. That was our daughter. And then inside, our son, he and I had been sitting next to each other talking and, people watching and all that. He went to get something to eat. And when he came back, he sat down across the table from me, and I didn't recognize him. I'm just watching him. I'm watching him eat his food, and I'm studying like his bone structure and all this. And I'm thinking, wow, he seems very comfortable in my space, because he's my son. But I didn't recognize him. And then he phased into someone I recognized. Okay. Now, I didn't really know how to explain this until a few months later. My wife also does community theater. And on the premiere night of the opening night of her play, these same 2 kids and I were already there outside the playhouse waiting for her to arrive to wish her well, break a leg and all that. As she walks up the sidewalk carrying all of her clothes for her different scene changes, they're joking with her, and I'm looking at her, and I'm watching her change. First she looked Italian, then she looked Spanish, and it's like, okay, and I know this is that same thing going on here. What is this all about? And then I realized in all 3 instances, daughter and the son from the office party and my wife this night, in all 3 cases, 2 things I can say are true. One, their energy states were elevated because they're excited. I mean, the kids are excited. We're going to the big office party, and my wife's excited it's opening night for her play. But they're all 3 also are having to be people other than who they are. The 2 children were having to be grown up. They were having to be on the best behavior. They were having to be someone else than who they are. My wife was having to be other characters. So it's as if as a guess, and this is a real stretch because I just don't know, it's as if this empathy had a visual element to it now, and somehow was reading that inner emotional state in a way that presented a different looking person. Someone said, "Oh, maybe you're seeing them in their past lives." I don't know. I mean, if I say it didn't feel like that, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But I have a feeling that when you're having to be someone else other than who you are, it might be very natural on some level to look different as well. So I don't know, but I hope to find other people who've had similar experiences as that and gain some more understanding. And then, yeah, those were the biggies. And then sometimes waking up at 3 a.m. in my house and looking up at my ceiling and seeing stars, that's been interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just seeing stars is like, okay. And I think that those are the main things probably. And and the people changing their look. I mean, that happened even up to the other day. It happens generally when I'm really connecting with people, though.
It's very interesting. It's not something that I've heard of a lot with, I guess, near-death experiences. Not something I've heard as a common after effect or something that's happened since their experience. But who knows? Maybe if our listeners are listening and they're thinking, well, I relate to that, maybe they can let us know or get in touch with you.
Please
do. It's such an interesting experience, Jim. I think you're probably as aware as I am that it's a little bit of a different near-death experience. I love that you started off by saying most people go through a tunnel, they see a white light, they have all these types of things. But I think actually there's a lot of different ways that people experience their near-death experience. Lots of different things that we see, things we feel, emotions we go through. And your one is really quite a different one outside the box, which I love. I love that it's different because it gets me thinking. Honestly, my mind is in overdrive because it is so different.
Yeah. One of the things that has come up in my meditation was that, when we look in a mirror here, we're able to justify all the hard decisions we make in life. We might even say, I look great today, or I can do great, things like this, we look through the filters of our ego. But basically, here in this world, we live life looking at it through the filters we want. Over on the other side, we're stripped away of those filters, and we generally see life there through the filters we need. And because even though we do have a lot of commonalities within our near-death experiences, like the tunnel and the loved ones and the life review and things like that, it's still incredibly individual. And there are some very specific things that to the core occur to make that person understand, wow, whatever's going on here, I am known down to my deepest, darkest secrets or my deepest, darkest fears, my highest hopes. Somebody knows, and somebody was able to touch those over on the other side. And I think in many ways, because our needs are individual, it's almost like we're all having the same experience, but we see it differently because our filters of need are themselves different. So that's
very interesting. Yes, that's great. Jim Bruton, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing that and chatting around some things which are slightly outside of your near-death experience as well. I loved hearing all the different aspects of it, the different parts of how things were for you when, after the experience. Are you all okay now in terms of your recovery? Is your body okay?
I have a slight limp, but you would never notice it really. But there's no pain at all. Overall, it's been an amazing recovery.
And you're still flying?
No, I joked one time and said, if I build another airplane, my wife will finish the job the crash started. But
no.
but it's interesting. It's not out of fear. It's really like I crossed it off the list. It's like I've done everything. Build plane, fly plane, crash plane, done. It's
don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, on to the next thing. Near-death experience is the next great adventure now, right?
Oh, I love it. That's so good. Jim Bruton, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Kirsty, and to your viewers and listeners as well. Thank you for the gift of your time.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. Don't forget you can also pick up your VIP access pass for additional content at patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. You can connect with us via the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page, and I look forward to catching you for another episode soon.